Jesus called the disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing out of their treasury to the treasury. For the others have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had to live on." Finally, the season has come. I'm not thinking of this lovely autumn weather that has indeed shown up after a sizzling September and a too hot October. And I'm not talking about the post-election season, God knows. I am speaking about the beloved annual pledge season celebrated in churches throughout Christendom at this time of year. Yes. Church communities all around the world are starting to think and plan about the coming year and how to meet whatever new challenges or opportunities they may face. And, by sheer coincidence, what biblical text does the Revised Common Lectionary prescribe for today as we begin to start our annual Faith in Action Pledge campaign? But the story often referred to as the widow's mite, M-I-T-E, mite. This story of a poor widow putting in her last 2 copper coins into the temple treasury is so often lifted up by preachers like me as an inspiring act of sacrificial giving, and wouldn't you like to be like that widow? But I think we need to take a closer look at the story and see what's really going on here. Jesus is somebody who notices things. He notices this woman, and he sees that she's poor, maybe based on how she's dressed or how she carries herself when she's surrounded by all these self-important people that are gathered around the temple treasury. And maybe Jesus, from that, guesses that she's a widow, since widows at that time and place tended to be vulnerable and marginalized class of people, as Sally pointed out to us. The other possibility is that this woman is somebody Jesus knows, and that he knows her social situation and her economic circumstance. As Jesus watches this woman put her last 2 coins into the treasury, he calls his disciples over, and he gets their attention, he gets our attention, to watch what she's doing. Jesus describes what she's doing, saying, "Look, after all those others have contributed out of their abundance, she is giving out of her poverty all that she has." And he sounds surprised, and yes, he sounds impressed, but he doesn't really say whether he approves or not of what she's doing. Jesus was, first and foremost, a teacher, a rabbi, and many rabbis of his generation were concerned about a kind of reckless exuberance in people's giving, because these rabbis saw that people sometimes get carried away and they may give away what they actually need to survive. And so the rabbis of Jesus' time began to teach tithing, giving 10% of your wealth or income, not just as a minimum, but as a limit to too enthusiastic giving. Now, we know that tithing is a biblical requirement. You can look at Leviticus 27:30 if you want, for example. But those early rabbis said, let's make 10% an upper limit as well. Give 10%, but don't give more. They were worried that people who were getting carried away were giving away too much and would end up needing help themselves, for their families. Jesus notices something else that day. A few verses earlier, as Pastor Lee just read for us, Jesus offers a critique of some of the scribes, some of those who work in the temple establishment. Jesus says, look, those people like to walk around in long robes, and they like to be greeted with respect and have nice seats, and they like to enjoy the privilege of their position. And then he says, some of them do one more thing. They devour the houses of who? You can say it out loud. Widows. They devour the houses of widows, often the most vulnerable people. And they do it all the time, appearing to be sanctimonious, holy. So maybe it's no big mystery why this woman is down to her last 2 copper coins. The mystery for Jesus may be why she's choosing to give those precious pennies away to the temple. As we know, Jesus has this kind of ongoing love-hate thing going on with the temple. He knows it's the house of God. And he knows that it's so often filled with people with their own agendas in mind. After all, just a few verses earlier in chapter 11, Jesus is turning over the temples of the money changers, sending coins large and small rolling all over the place. And the priests and the scribes are so mad, they begin thinking of ways to kill him. Jesus loved the idea and the ideal of the temple, but he couldn't stand an institution that exists only for itself. It reminds me of Pope Francis's controversial comment a few years ago that churches that don't do anything for the poor and the homeless ought to lose their tax-exempt status. A while ago, I saw an online headline that caught my eye. It read, "North Carolina church caught practicing Christianity. Neighbors complain." It was about a church that converted part of its building into apartments for people who had fallen into hard circumstances. But this display of extravagant generosity was met with some dismay and condemnation from neighbors who were afraid the wrong sort of people might be moving in next door. And that article ended by asking, can't a church open its doors to the same people Jesus would have welcomed? Now, we occasionally get that same kind of pushback from our beloved nearby neighbors to the work that we do here, although most are supportive and even generous. And so for every neighbor who gives us a dirty look for people taking up space on their sidewalk, 10 others come by to smile, or to ask about volunteering, or to bring batches of fresh direct bags so people can carry home the food from the food pantry. The Methodist founder, John Wesley, has a take on giving that I like to think about at this season of the year. In the early late 1730s, when Wesley was working as a tutor at Oxford University, he made 30 British pounds a year. He found that he could live on 28 pounds, and so he gave away the other 2 pounds. That's not quite a tithe, but it's getting there. The next year, Wesley's income doubled to 60 pounds a year. And what do you know? He could still live on 28 pounds. That's kind of amazing right there. Don't we just assume that if we make more, we're going to find a way to spend more? So in that year, Wesley gave away 32 pounds. The year after that, as a result of some writing and publishing, he was able to make 90 pounds, and he still lived on 28, and he gave away 62, and it went on throughout his life. There is something countercultural about that idea for us, as Pastor Andrea pointed out to me this week. That's not how we think about money in our time and our place. A time when we lionize and idolize billionaires, even when we understand that what it takes to make that kind of money often exploiting other people. Yesterday, I saw a notification from Bloomberg News about Elon Musk. Elon Musk. Those are 2 words I did not ever expect to utter aloud in church. However, Bloomberg reported that Mr. Musk earned $50 billion in the few days since Tuesday's election. Now, If you or I were to make $100,000 a year, how long would it take to earn 50 billion? Simple math. Heck of us got it. 500,000 years, which is a long time. Who has that kind of time? I don't consider myself a socialist, but on my good days, I do think of myself as a Christian. And there's just something so wrong about an economic system that not only permits that, but idolizes that. Amen? John Wesley had this different take on money, and maybe it amounts to a countercultural understanding. In his sermon, The Use of Money, which he wrote in 1760, Wesley is not anti-money. He says it's actually quite useful. Money can become food in the mouths of hungry people. It can become a safe place for people who lack housing. But Wesley gives some simple instructions on how we can use money. Earn all you can, he says. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Earn all you can as long as you can earn it without hurting anybody else. And without hurting yourself in your mind or harming your health or betraying your soul. Save all you can by living simply and not wasting money on yourself or your children, he says, of which Wesley had none. And without wasting money on things you don't really need and things your kids actually do not need. And then give all you can. He says, not a tenth, not a third, not a half, but all that is God's, be it more or be it less. See, to Wesley, God's share wasn't 10%, it was everything. Everything comes from God and it passes through our hands. While we have it, we need to use it wisely and thoughtfully, and we need to spend it prayerfully. Every expense we have, we pay out as stewards of God. When we spend what we need to survive and to take care of those who are our responsibility, that's part of God's share also. That's part of God's work also. That's part of God's 100%. Anything that's left over after that is still God's, and it is to be shared. Because giving is a way of living a life of abundance. Our mighty widow knows that. She knows that God is the source of her supply, and whatever social or religious institutions have done for her or not done for her, she has faith in God, that somehow God can and will provide her needs. That the one who created all that is will never forsake her and will never abandon her. That the one who gives us the world, the one who gives us the very hills and mountains and plains of the world, and also finds a way to provide this woman with the necessities of food and water and clothing and shelter, will never forsake her or abandon her. And I think she gives because she can give. She gives not out of obligation, but out of an act of extravagant and radical and faithful, exuberant generosity. Her gift is her statement of faith, a mighty statement that we're still talking about 20 centuries later. Giving is living. It's not about the amount, it's about the intention. It's about the dedication. It's about a commitment to an abundant life for us and for everybody. It's about understanding that whatever is going on in the world, in our nation, in our city, everything we have comes from God. And it all belongs to God. And it all returns to God. Amen. Amen.